So one of the things we talk about most in phase 2, developing our plant, the taper and all that of our plant is a sacrifice. We talk about sacrifice branches and sacrifice leaders or apexes. They both run on the same kind of principle, but they function a little differently, and we'll be talking about the differences between a branch and a leader sacrifice. So the reasons we want to use a sacrifice branch are to build wood. We want to create a thicker girth on the trunk below. We want to develop a stronger root system. And because a sacrifice branch will do that no matter where it is, it functions a little differently. For example, if you have a branch over here growing out as a sacrifice, it might create an oblong trunk. It might create a very thick root down here. We don't want to do this for very long. And another thing that we might want to avoid is cutting it all the way back to the trunk, because we can leave a scar. This branch was left on, we didn't decandle it, we let it run for a couple of years. It's thickening up a really weak, skinny branch, which is a really important branch. So we want to thicken that up with this. We'll cut it back, not to the trunk, but to a side branch. It'll create branch taper, and we won't have made the cardinal error of a large trunk wound. The sacrificial canopy branch, this leader or apex branch, can do several things that are beneficial. One is that it can create trunk caliper, but it's also hidden in the top of the tree, so we can hide a scar much better. If it's down here, we get into a bit of a trouble. Another great feature of relying on top sacrifices as opposed to bottom ones is that it grows roots 360 all the way around the trunk. It doesn't prefer one quadrant over another. So that's one reason to focus on these. And then we're going to talk about transitioning next. One thing to be cautious of with these is that you can't go to sleep when you're growing these things, because they can get away from you. They're exponential in the girth that they produce year after year after year. So you want to plan in advance when you're going to cut. I'm going to cut this off a year from now or 2 years from now. This little shoot, you probably want to cut off 2 years from now. If it were sacrificial. This has already been running for a couple years, and we're right around the point of wanting to think about cutting it back and choosing the next one. So here's maybe an appropriate one. This is a possible new leader as well. So the danger of this getting away from us is an aesthetic danger, because if we wait too long or we skip a year or two, we end up with a big scar, big wound that has to heal over. So we want to make that transition before that happens. That's the only problem with letting it go too far. We can always transition to something else and keep those wounds small and keep the momentum of the plant going. This is why you want to plan in advance, because if we cut back to some tiny little thing, we're losing about a year of energy. So we want to cut back to something that already has some energy, already has a direction. Cut this off, it's not going to lose anything. So this is a Japanese black pine, and we have been decandling the bottom of this tree. When we do that, the regrowth creates a fairly small bud, and it almost stops trunk growth. Any kind of decandling will do that. So up here, we have shoots where we haven't decandled. Notice the size of the bud. It's just this monstrous thing, which is wonderful if you're creating a sacrifice. Same thing goes for this. These have big buds in the apical areas and tiny little buds down here. We haven't been decandling this area, but they're weaker because they're lower. Up here we have a monstrous bud, and we've cut off all kinds of the smaller ones in order to have the strongest sacrifices possible, because that big bud is going to create a lot of taper for us. A lot of caliper. And that translates all the way down into the roots. So the reason we're growing sacrificial top branches on this one is to create new trunk line and to create some taper up here. But the one over here is a little bit different because we have multiple trunks on this group planting. And the problem is that 3 of our trunks are very similar. 1, 2, 3. They're almost the same size. Big problem. So our main tree, which we are calling this one, we have left an extension on that, a sacrifice. And we'll probably leave it on for some years, but we're going to keep whittling it back to new sacrifices. We're going to transition to new ones. If we leave that on for 3 or 4 years, we're going to have a trunk with no taper that will have big wounds on it. So we're going to want to transition. But that's why we're doing it on this group. A little bit of a different purpose than the black pine. So this is a possible next leader sacrifice. And this is one that we can cut off now. It's growing quite well. If we let this run, this is going to continue to thicken. So we don't have to wait until this is a perfect thickness. We're going to keep developing that. And this is a fairly small cut, which is a nice option. We'll leave this one on for now. But that will give this more energy, and this should be about that long by the end of next year. So I'm going to prune this a little bit long because I don't want any dieback. But the best time to do this is probably early fall. Then we would get a little back budding, but you could do this at any time of year. And this is going to get quite a bit stronger in the next year. Both of these trees are pot-grown trees. This is grown from a seed. These are grown from cuttings. To go back to our part 1, phase 1. But one thing to know about the sacrifice branch is that it is to be used very cautiously with a plant that has natural taper, such as this one. We can create taper with branches. We can grow these branches out and we're going to create a very natural taper. This is considered a long view tree, a tree that you would see from far away and that you would see a very natural taper with. This is a tree which is a short view tree. It's as if you were standing right next to it and you're looking up at it and you're going to see this very dramatic taper. It's still a little bit of a fiction, a construct, but that's really the way that we see these. This type of tree can be grown very well in the ground and with sort of what we used to call trunk chops, these sacrificial branches that you grow out and then you chop it and then you have